I found the notary stamp on a Thursday afternoon in a folder I wasn't supposed to be looking through because the folder was labeled Mom House, and I was the one who'd been paying the property taxes on that house for 3 years since she died, so I figured it was mine to look through. My stepsister, Kayla, had asked me casually over the phone the week before whether I'd gotten around to the paperwork transferring the house fully into both our names since the will had left it to us jointly, and something about how she asked it, too light, too rehearsed, made me open the file cabinet in her guest room instead of waiting for her to bring it up again. Inside the folder was a quitclaim deed. My name was on it, my signature was on it. I stared at that signature for a long moment because I recognized my own handwriting in it, the specific slant I've had since high school, and I also knew with total certainty, standing in my dead mother's stepdaughter's guest room, that I had never signed anything transferring my half of that house to anyone. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed and read the document 3 times. It was dated 8 months earlier. It listed Kayla as sole owner. There was a notary stamp from a notary public whose name I didn't recognize in a town 40 minutes from where either of us lived. I picked up my phone to call the county recorder's office before I even decided to, my hands doing the sensible thing while the rest of me was still catching up to what I was looking at. The woman on the phone confirmed it flatly, like it was nothing. The deed had been filed 6 months ago. The house with the kitchen window my mother stood at every morning for 30 years, the house we'd both agreed at her funeral we would never sell, would always share, would keep in the family the way she'd asked us to, had a single owner now. And it wasn't me. I sat there in the guest room for a long moment after the call ended, phone still warm against my palm, listening to the ordinary sounds of the house around me, the refrigerator humming down the hall, a car passing outside, as if the house itself hadn't just quietly stopped being mine while I wasn't looking.
My name is Dana. I'm 42. I run the billing department at a regional orthopedic practice, the kind of job people's eyes glaze over when I describe it, but I like it. I like systems, I like things that reconcile, I like a ledger that balances at the end of the month because somebody made sure it did. My mother married Kayla's father when I was 9, and Kayla was 7, and for a long time we were exactly the kind of stepsisters people write hopeful things about. Different enough to never compete, close enough to trust. Our parents divorced when we were both in college, but by then, Kayla and I had built something separate from them, something that survived the split cleanly. And I was proud of that, proud that whatever had gone wrong between the adults hadn't touched what we'd built. When Mom got sick 4 years ago, Kayla was the one who moved back into town to help with appointments, and I was the one who handled the financial side from 2 hours away, and we split it fairly. Or I thought we did, and I never once resented her for being the one physically present, because I trusted the arrangement. I trusted her, the way you trust a person who has been a fixed point in your life since you were 9 years old. When Mom passed, the will was simple, the house to both of us equally, with the understanding, spoken clearly at the reading, that neither of us would sell without the other's agreement. I paid the property taxes because it was easier for me to handle online from where I live, and Kayla maintained the house physically, mowed the lawn, kept the gutters clear, and for 3 years that division felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. 2 people honoring the last request of a woman who raised us both. I believed completely that we were still doing that. I had no reason in 3 years to check the deed. That's the arrangement I described to friends whenever the topic of family and property came up, held out almost as proof that not every blended family ends up tangled in resentment, that some of us actually get it right. I used that story about us at dinner parties, at work, told it to my husband early in our relationship as a kind of proof that I knew how to love people without keeping score, and I believed every word of it completely.
I need you to understand Kayla the way I actually understood her before any of this, because she was never a villain to me, not for a single day of the 33 years I knew her. Kayla is warm in a way that disarms people quickly. She remembers birthdays without being reminded. She shows up to things with the exact right thing to bring. She has a gift for making whoever she's talking to feel like the only person in the room. At the funeral, she was the one who stood up and spoke unscripted about our mother's laugh, and there wasn't a dry eye in that chapel, mine included. Privately, though, underneath that warmth, Kayla has always carried something I used to read as insecurity and now understand was closer to entitlement dressed up as insecurity. Her own mother left when she was 5, and my mother was the one who raised her from that point forward in every way that mattered. And I think somewhere in Kayla's mind over the years, raised by quietly became belongs to, a private ownership she never said out loud, but which I started noticing in small ways. The way she'd introduce mom as my mom to new people without the step, the way she'd bristle almost imperceptibly if I told a childhood story that centered me instead of her. I used to find that endearing, honestly, a woman who loved my mother enough to claim her fully. I didn't understand until the deed that the claiming had a harder edge to it than love. I think Kayla decided at some point in the last 4 years, physically present while I was 2 hours away, that proximity had earned her something the will didn't actually give her, that showing up to appointments and mowing a lawn meant the house was more rightfully hers than mine, that I was, in some quiet ledger she kept in her head, the sister who hadn't done enough to deserve an equal share. I don't think she woke up one day and decided to forge my signature. I think she talked herself into it slowly, the way people always do, one small justification at a time, until forgery just felt like paperwork catching up to what she'd already decided was fair. I've turned that theory over many times since, trying to be fair to the woman who raised half of her childhood alongside mine, and I still land in the same place. Not malice from the start, but a slow erosion of a line she used to respect. Looking back, I can find the first move almost exactly a year after the funeral, when Kayla mentioned in passing that she'd started handling some of the house stuff directly since she was local and it was easier than looping me in on every small decision. I didn't think twice about it. A broken water heater, a termite inspection, small maintenance calls that made sense for her to handle without a 2-hour away sister weighing in. Then she stopped sending me copies of the property insurance renewal, which she used to forward every year without me asking. And when I noticed and mentioned it, she said she'd just renewed it automatically online and would send the confirmation, which she never quite got around to. And I let it go because chasing down an insurance PDF felt petty against the backdrop of us both still grieving. Then a neighbor of Mom's, a woman named Carol, who'd known us both since childhood, mentioned to me at a different family gathering that she'd seen some paperwork people at the house a while back walking the property with Kayla, and I asked what paperwork people. And Carol looked uncertain and said she'd assumed it was about the will being finalized, and I let it go too, because it did sound like something that could be normal. Then Kayla started referring to the house in texts as my place instead of the house or Mom's house. Small enough that I noticed it and dismissed it as a slip, the kind of shorthand you develop for a place you spend more physical time in than anyone else does. Then I asked 8 months ago whether we should get the house appraised for our own records, and Kayla changed the subject twice before actually answering, and I let that go as well, telling myself grief makes people avoidant about the practical stuff, telling myself I was the one being cold by even bringing up appraisals so soon. I have a whole quiet inventory now in my head of every one of these moments I explained away, and
Every one of them on its own sounded completely reasonable. That's the part that unsettles me most in hindsight. None of it sounded like a lie by itself. It only became a lie once I could see all of it lined up in a row. Somewhere around the 7-month mark after the appraisal conversation she dodged, I stopped being able to explain the pattern away. Not because I made a conscious decision to stop, but because the explanations had simply run out of runway. I started quietly writing things down, not confronting anything yet, just noting dates and details, the way you log symptoms before a doctor's visit, so you don't lose the thread, so you can't talk yourself back out of what you're noticing. The missing insurance forward, Carol's comment about paperwork people, the my place text, the dodged appraisal question. I didn't act on any of it yet, and I think, honestly, some part of me was afraid of what acting on it would mean, because Kayla wasn't just a stepsister on paper. She was the person who sat with me in a hospital hallway during Mom's last week, the person who called me every single night that final month, just so I wouldn't be alone with the fear of it. The person I would have said, right up until that Thursday in her guest room, knew me better than almost anyone left in my life. Questioning any of it felt like risking a loss bigger than a house. And for months, I think I chose the version of events that let me keep that relationship intact, rather than the version my own notes were quietly building toward. But a pattern, once you've truly seen its shape, doesn't let you unsee it again. Every new detail after that stopped landing as its own confusing, isolated event and started snapping directly into the shape I already half understood. A month before I found the folder, a cousin mentioned offhand that Kayla had told her, at a barbecue I wasn't at, that she was thinking about finally fixing up the house properly now that it's really mine to work with. Not our house, not the house we share, mine to work with. I didn't say anything to the cousin, I just felt something cold settle low in my stomach, the specific, unmistakable feeling of understanding arriving a beat before the proof does. And I knew, driving home that night, that I was going to have to go looking for the proof myself soon, because waiting for Kayla to hand it to me clearly wasn't a plan anymore. I didn't sleep well that night, replaying every small dismissal I'd made over the previous 7 months, counting how many times I had chosen comfort over clarity and calling it patience instead of what it actually was. The afternoon I actually found the folder is the moment this whole thing stopped being a suspicion and became a fact I had to live inside. And I want to describe honestly what that felt like, because it wasn't dramatic in the way you'd expect. It was quiet. Almost unnervingly quiet. I sat on the edge of Kayla's guest bed with the deed in my hands, and I read my own forged signature a 4th time. And what I remember most clearly isn't panic. It's a strange, specific cold that started in my hands and moved up my arms, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with the temperature of a room. I thought about the notary stamp, and I thought about how someone has to physically appear before a notary to sign a document like that, which meant either a notary had stamped a document without properly verifying the signer, or Kayla had found a way around that step entirely, and either possibility made my stomach turn in a different, worse direction. I thought about the kitchen window Mom stood at every morning, about the promise we made out loud, together, at her funeral, in front of family who all heard us say it, that the house would stay shared, would stay ours, would never be one person's decision to make alone. I got up off the bed carefully, like the floor might register the weight of what I now knew, and I put the folder back exactly the way I'd found it, paper squared, tab facing the same direction, because some instinct in me already understood I needed Kayla to have no idea I'd seen it. I walked out to my car in the driveway of the house I apparently no longer owned any part of, and I sat in the driver's seat for almost 20 minutes without turning the key, just breathing, letting the fact settle into my body the way you let cold water settle around you instead of flinching against it. I did not call her. I did not text her. Sitting there in that driveway, without fully deciding to, I made the same decision I think anyone in my position eventually makes. I was not going to let her know that I knew, not yet, not until I understood exactly how deep this went and exactly what I could prove.
I want to be honest about what it cost me to choose stillness over confrontation, because I think that choice gets misunderstood by people who haven't had to make it. There's a version of that afternoon where I walk back into the house and hold up the deed and demand an explanation on the spot, and some part of me wanted that version badly, wanted the immediate relief of saying the true thing out loud instead of carrying it silently. I didn't do that. And I killed that instinct on purpose, in my car, in that driveway, because I understood exactly how that confrontation would go. Kayla is quick and warm and has spent her whole life being the person people believe first. And a confrontation built only on my own outrage would hand her every advantage. The wounded expression, the reasonable-sounding explanation assembled in real time, the chance to make me look paranoid instead of correct. I had watched her talk her way through smaller disagreements with total command of the room. I was not going to hand her a bigger one with nothing but my word behind me. I needed proof heavy enough that no amount of charm could talk it back into ambiguity. So instead, for the next several weeks, I performed. I called her on our usual schedule. I asked about her job, her garden, the leak in her bathroom she'd mentioned. I let her tell me, at one point, that she was starting to think about some updates to the house. And I said that sounded nice and meant absolutely none of the warmth in my voice, only the words themselves. That performance took something out of me I wasn't prepared for. There were evenings I hung up the phone and sat in silence afterward. Not because I was sad exactly, but because pretending costs a specific kind of energy that grief and anger together don't leave much room for. I told myself repeatedly that this wasn't dishonesty, it was strategy. It was protecting the truth until the truth could actually hold its own weight. I needed her to keep believing she was safe, because a person who believes she's safe keeps behaving the same way, keeps leaving the same doors unlocked. And I intended to walk through every single one of them before I ever said a word about what I'd found in that folder.
I started with the county recorder's office formally this time, requesting a certified copy of everything filed on the property in the last 4 years, which I was entitled to as a legal co-owner of record, regardless of what any quitclaim deed claimed. That request alone surfaced 2 documents I hadn't known existed: the forged quitclaim deed itself and a separate refinance application filed 3 months after it, using the house as sole collateral in Kayla's name only. I called a real estate attorney, a careful, unhurried man named Mr. Osei, who'd handled Mom's estate originally, and laid out exactly what I'd found. And he went quiet in the specific way professionals go quiet when they're recalculating how serious something actually is. He pulled the notary's license information from the state registry and found that the listed notary had in fact been disciplined 18 months earlier for improper witnessing practices, meaning there was a real possibility no in-person signing had happened at all, that the whole thing had been rubber-stamped without me ever being in the same room as that document. I reached out, carefully, to the bank that had approved the refinance, framing it as a routine ownership verification, and confirmed the loan had closed based entirely on the fraudulent single-owner deed with funds dispersed to an account in Kayla's name 6 weeks later. I pulled old text threads between us, screenshotting the "my place" language and the dodged appraisal conversation, building a simple, dated timeline the way I build any reconciliation at work. Chronological, sourced, no interpretation added that the facts themselves didn't already support. Mr. Osei confirmed that what I had cumulatively wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It was documented deed fraud and a fraudulently obtained loan with a paper trail clean enough to act on. By the end of 5 weeks, I had the forged deed, the notary's disciplinary record, the refinance documents, the disbursement account, and a written timeline connecting all of it. Every piece I found made the next piece easier to locate, the way one loose thread, pulled patiently enough, eventually unravels the whole seam. Mr. Osei told me near the end of that stretch that in 20 years of practice, he rarely saw a case this cleanly documented on the wronged party's side. And I remember feeling almost nothing at the compliment, just a flat, practical relief that the facts would finally be able to speak louder than either of us.
Nobody warns you that the hardest part of building a case against someone you love isn't the building. It's the living your regular life on top of it while you do. During those 5 weeks, I still went to work every day and reconciled other people's billing disputes with total focus, because the job doesn't care what's happening in the rest of your life. And I still called my aunt back about a family reunion and sounded, I think, entirely normal doing it. I lost sleep in a specific way, not spiraling exactly, but waking at 4 in the morning with my mind already sorting through document dates before I was fully conscious. My body treating the whole situation like a threat that required round-the-clock monitoring even while I slept. I grieved something during those weeks that I didn't expect to grieve, which was the specific, easy closeness Kayla and I used to have on the phone. The version of our relationship where I didn't have to calculate every word before I said it. Pretending that closeness still existed, night after night, while quietly building the case that would end it, felt like a low, constant hum underneath everything else I did. I remember one call in particular, maybe 3 weeks in, where Kayla laughed at something I said, and I laughed back, genuinely, before catching myself and feeling something like whiplash. A real, easy moment of connection sitting right on top of the thing I now knew about her. Both true at the same time, neither one canceling the other out. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing during that stretch. Not my husband, at first, not my closest friend, not even Mr. Osei beyond what was strictly necessary for the legal work. I've thought about why since, and the honest answer is that I needed to carry it alone for a little while, because I wasn't sure yet who I'd become on the other side of it, and I didn't want anyone's reaction shaping that before I'd had the chance to sit with it myself, fully, without an audience. When I finally did tell my husband weeks later, he asked only one question, whether I was safe. And I remember being grateful in that moment that he understood this was never really about the money.
There was one conversation I kept avoiding, and it wasn't with Kayla. It was with the notary listed on the deed, a man named Reginald Ostrowski, whose office, according to the state registry, was in a strip mall 40 minutes outside town. I put off calling him for almost 2 weeks, partly because Mr. Osei was handling the formal inquiry through proper channels, but partly, honestly, because some part of me already suspected what I'd hear and wasn't ready for the confirmation. When Mr. Osei finally got a response, it came back worse than either of us expected. Ostrowski's office had no record of me ever appearing before him, no record of any appointment involving my name at all. But they did have a record of Kayla visiting twice that month, once alone and once with a woman whose name meant nothing to either of us. Mr. Osei pulled at that thread and found, through a records request, that the second woman had a documented history of appearing as a witness on several other disputed filings across the county over the past 3 years, always alongside notarizations later flagged as irregular, always for a modest fee that never showed up as anything more formal than cash. Kayla hadn't just forged a signature herself in some improvised, desperate moment. She had gone looking, specifically, deliberately, the way you'd shop for a contractor, and had found exactly what she was looking for. That reframing changed something in how I carried the rest of this. I stopped feeling like a woman who'd been hurt by accident and started understanding myself as someone who had simply been the easiest target in a plan built well before I ever opened that folder.
Once I had everything laid out, the forged deed, Ostrowski's disciplinary history, the paid witnesses pattern across the county, the refinance and its disbursement, Carol's early comment about paperwork people walking the property, I finally let myself ask the question I'd been circling since that Thursday in the guest room. Why? Not the mechanics, which I understood completely by then, but the actual human why, the reason a woman does this to the sister who sat beside her at their mother's deathbed. And when I let myself really sit with everything I knew about Kayla, her own mother leaving at 5, the quiet, lifelong habit of claiming our mom as fully, singularly hers, the resentment I'd always read as insecurity, the answer that assembled itself wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't really about the house at all, not underneath. I think Kayla needed, somewhere in the years since Mom got sick, to be able to point at something and say, "This is mine, entirely, earned, uncontested," because she had spent her whole life being the daughter who had to share a mother she'd only gotten because of a marriage, never because of blood. Always slightly aware, I think, that her claim could be questioned by someone with a stronger legal one. The house wasn't just property to her. It was proof, finally, of an ownership she'd never quite felt secure in anywhere else in her life. That understanding didn't make the forgery acceptable. It didn't undo the fraudulent loan or the years of small, deliberate lies stacked carefully on top of each other. But it did something to me I wasn't expecting. It took the story out of the shape where Kayla was simply a predator and I was simply a fool, and placed it into a sadder, truer shape, where a woman with an old, unhealed wound had decided that stealing certainty was easier than ever asking, out loud, whether she was allowed to have it freely. The damage was enormous, documented, real. The reason underneath it was almost unbearably small. And understanding that didn't soften the betrayal. It just gave it a different, quieter weight to carry alongside everything else. I think that's the part people rarely prepare you for when they warn you about betrayal. That understanding someone's wound doesn't obligate you to keep absorbing the damage it does to your own life.
I asked Kayla to meet me at the house itself on a Saturday morning, telling her I wanted to talk through some ideas for the updates she'd mentioned, which was true only in the narrowest, most technical sense. I brought a folder, plain and unremarkable, because I wanted the weight of it in my hands to speak before I did. We sat at Mom's old kitchen table, the one with the window she used to stand at, and I opened the folder and laid everything out in order. The forged deed beside a certified copy of my actual signature for comparison, then Ostrowski's disciplinary record, then the refinance documents, then the paid witnesses pattern across the county, then Mr. Osei's written summary of it all. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask her to explain herself because I already knew with total certainty what kind of explanation she'd reach for, and I hadn't come there for it. I told her, quietly, that I wasn't asking her to admit to anything out loud because the documents didn't need her word, only her eyes on them. I watched her go still while she read, watched the exact choreography I'd braced myself for begin to form, the reframe assembling behind her eyes before she had finished the first page, her mouth opening once, twice, testing which sentence to reach for first. I let the silence sit there, unfilled, though silence has never come naturally to me, though my instinct in every relationship I've ever had has been to fill space, smooth it over, make it easier for the other person. I made myself hold it anyway because I understood, finally, that the silence itself was doing more work in that kitchen than any words I could have offered. Before I stood up,
I told her one thing only, that Mr. Osei had already filed the necessary motions and that the fraud would be addressed through proper legal channels rather than through any conversation the two of us might have at that table, and that this was no longer something between just us. It had its own momentum now. I closed the folder, stood, and left before she said a single word back, because whatever she said in that first raw moment would be reflex, not truth, and I no longer needed her reflex for anything. Driving away from that house, I felt none of the satisfaction I'd expected after weeks of imagining this exact moment. Only a clean, quiet exhaustion, the specific tiredness of having finally set down something heavy I'd been carrying without complaint for far too long.
She called me 6 times over the following 2 days, and I didn't answer any of them. The text that came instead told me everything I needed to know about what kind of response I was actually going to get. There was no, "You're right, I'm so sorry, I don't know what I was thinking." There was, "I think you're misunderstanding what that paperwork actually was. And I was going to explain everything to you eventually. I just wanted to fix the roof first." And on the 4th text, "Please don't do anything you can't take back before we've even talked properly," which wasn't an apology. It was a warning wearing an apology's clothes, and I recognized the outfit instantly because I'd watched her wear versions of it for other people my whole life, just never aimed at me. She showed up at my house 4 days later, unannounced, and I let her in, not because I was afraid of what she might say, but because I was finished performing anything for her and wanted to see plainly what was actually left once the performance stopped on both sides. She cried, and I think the crying was at least partly real. I think some part of her genuinely grieved what this meant for us, even while another part of her, underneath the tears, was still visibly calculating how much of the fallout she could manage, minimize, reframe. She said, "I never meant for it to go this far," more than once. And each time I thought about the research notary, the paid witness, the refinance funds already spent, and understood that I never meant for it to go this far, and I planned every step of this deliberately over months, were somehow both true in her mind at once. The way people hold two irreconcilable things without ever looking directly at the seam between them. She never once used the word fraud. She used words like misunderstanding and getting ahead of things, language built to soften something that had never been soft. But something in that room shifted permanently, and I felt it happen in real time. Not her concessing, but me watching her reach one more time for a reframe and realizing clearly that it no longer had any power over what I already completely knew. When she finally left that afternoon, she hugged me at the door out of old habit, and I let her, and I noticed almost clinically that I felt nothing sharp about it either way. Just the flat calm of a decision that had already been made somewhere further back than that conversation.
The legal process took nearly 7 months, and it cost more than I want to say out loud, even now. Not just money, though there was plenty of that, but time, and a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't fully leave your body even after the paperwork is settled. The deed was voided, and my ownership restored through the court. The fraudulent refinance was unwound, with Kayla personally responsible for the difference, a debt that will take her years to fully repay. I kept the house, though kept feels like an odd word for something I now walk through with a different kind of attention, checking corners I never used to think twice about. Here's what the win actually cost me, underneath the legal fees and the restored deed. I lost the specific easy trust I used to extend by default to the people closest to me, the trust that let me not double-check a document, not clock a slightly off phrase in a text and wonder what was underneath it. I don't know if I'll get that particular ease back, and some days I'm not sure I want it back because it made me easy to move around inside of for longer than it should have.
I lost the 33 years of a story I used to tell about myself and about her, that whatever had gone wrong between our parents, the two of us had built something separate and clean that nothing could touch. I had to rebuild that story with a harder, more careful version of myself standing inside it, one who reads every document twice now on principle. And I'm not going to pretend that version of me is worse, but she is colder. And there are days I genuinely miss being warm by default before I understood exactly what that warmth could cost me. My husband tells me the carefulness suits me, that it was always in there waiting for a reason, and some days I believe him, and other days I just miss the version of myself who never needed a reason to trust the people she loved.
I still live 2 hours from that house, and I still drive down to check on it myself now, every few months instead of trusting anyone else to handle it for me. I stand in the kitchen sometimes, at the window Mom used to stand at, and I think about the folder, squared and tab facing forward, put back exactly the way I found it that first Thursday afternoon, and about the 20 minutes I sat afterward in the driveway without turning the key. I want to tell you honestly what I was actually doing in that driveway, because I don't think I described it fully enough at the start. I wasn't in shock, not by the end of those 20 minutes. I was deciding, quietly, without any drama to it at all, that I was now the only person responsible for protecting what was mine, and that I was in fact entirely capable of doing exactly that. I think about that decision often, not because of Kayla, not really, but because of what it taught me about myself at 42, a woman who had always assumed her carefulness was reserved for spreadsheets and billing codes, discovering it could hold up just as well against something with this much at stake. I don't know if Kayla and I will ever be close again in the way we used to be, and I've made a strange, steady peace with not knowing that yet. What I do know, the only thing I can offer you at the end of this, is that the people capable of the coldest betrayals are rarely strangers circling from the outside. They're the ones who already have a key, the ones you handed a key to yourself, years earlier, back when handing it over felt like the safest, most natural thing in the world. I don't regret giving Kayla mine. I only regret how long it took me to notice she had a second one cut. But I notice everything now. And that, more than the house, more than the money, is the part of this that's actually permanently mine. Some evenings, standing at that kitchen window with the light going gold over the yard, I think my mother would understand exactly why I did what I did, quietly without asking her permission, in the same house she'd asked us both to keep.